Council, are you ready, Dean? Okay. All our parts are in order. I welcome you all here for the Salina City Planning Commission meeting for June 5th, 2012. Our first item on the agenda today is the approval of the summary minutes of May 15th, 2012's regular meeting. Are there any comments on the meetings or a motion to approve?
I would move we approve the minutes as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion is approved. Public hearing items for this afternoon's agenda. Item number 2, application CU 12-3, filed by Kansas Wesleyan University, requesting a conditional use permit for construction of a new maintenance office and shop. Is there a staff report?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This comes to you this afternoon as an application for a conditional use permit to allow construction of a new maintenance office and shop facility in property that is zoned as part of a C3 district. And the corridor that we're talking about today is the South 9th Street corridor that's located between Claflin and Cloud, specifically the east side of that. And the owner of the property and applicant, Kansas Wesleyan University, is proposing to construct a new maintenance shop facility on the east side of 9th Street, directly north of the Stutzman's Garden Center site. And it's intended to house their maintenance facilities, which today are partially housed underneath Glenn Martin Stadium over on 4th Street. And so the type of maintenance shop facility being proposed most closely resembles, on the private side, what would be a contractor's office and shop, and those types of uses are conditional in the C3 district. And so, again, we're on the property north of Stutzman's Garden Center. The site that we're looking at has about 185 feet of frontage on the east side of 9th Street. It's currently occupied by 4 buildings, which are this survey is a survey of existing conditions, and so we've got 3 rental dwellings on the property and a commercial building that's occupied by Crumpton Restoration and Cleaning. And what the applicant has indicated to us, at least initially, is they desire to remove the Crumpton building and one of the 2 rental dwellings and keep 2 of the rental dwellings in place. And so this is the Crumpton Restoration building that has historically been used for commercial uses, and then to the south of that is a rental dwelling, and to the north of that is 2 rental dwellings. We are in a C3 shopping center district, and your first responsibility today is to look at the change of use proposed from a commercial building and rental dwellings to a campus maintenance facility, and determine would that have any negative impact on the surrounding neighborhood. And then secondly, you need to look at the proposed location, design, and overall site plan being proposed, and determine whether you think that's compatible with the development pattern and use of adjacent properties both on South 9th and Highland in behind. So we have summarized for you, and John, some of the highlights, like the summary of the C3 zoning versus what is proposed, that would be helpful. And so again, the Craft Manor, the former Alco Plaza, now where Genesis and Harbor Freight and those places are, that is zoned C3 and is primarily designed for commercial, retail, and shopping related facilities, but that C3 zoning extends all the way up to Claflin. And there's no minimum as long as that district is part of a larger C3 district, which this is. And there's no minimum lot width or depth, and you can see we're talking about an area that's 185 feet by 150 feet You can cover up to 40% of a lot with building in the C3 district, and by our calculation, what is proposed would cover 33% of the lot, assuming that 2 of the existing dwellings remain in place. And then the maximum height of a building is 35 feet. They're proposing a 24-foot tall building. And we've got some footnotes there, the first of which is on side yard setback. There is no minimum setback required in the zoning ordinance for C3 property that abuts C3 property, but the building code does require a 10-foot building separation unless you have firewalls, and the initial plan submitted showed 5 feet. When the property abuts an alley or residential district, a 10-foot rear yard setback is required, and 5 feet is proposed along the alley. And then you must provide 2 parking spaces for each residential dwelling that is occupied. And in our review of the plan, we calculated that 8 spaces would be required for the maintenance facility and 2 parking spaces for the occupants of remaining residential units. In our commercial districts, all new projects have to provide some amount of front yard landscaping and parking lot screening. There was none proposed as part of this application, and at this time no signage was proposed. Those little footnotes at the bottom are hard to read, but this indicates that the building code requires a 10-foot setback or fire-rated wall construction. If you have a garage that faces an alley and you have a garage door facing the alley, the minimum setback is 10 feet for that garage door. And if you have a commercial development, one of the parking spaces you provide must be handicapped accessible, and the first one required must be van accessible as well. So we have done our analysis of C3 zoning as applies to this property, and the 3 things we are emphasizing in our report is concern about the side setback on the north, the proposed rear setback on the east, and the total number of our parking spaces if we're going to mix residential and commercial uses on the same lot. One of the things you're consider is welfare and convenience of the public, and this really isn't a facility that's geared towards serving public need or would be accessible to the public. It's primarily an internal support facility for Kansas Wesleyan. As far as the impact or injury to surrounding property, we're talking about a site that has 4 platted lots and part of vacated Russell Avenue. As you can see, there's 3 small houses there today and a small 1,500 square foot commercial building. The size of the lot is adequate in size and depth to accommodate some form of commercial development or redevelopment between Claflin and Cloud. We think that most of the complications or the suitability for redevelopment would be more desirable if the existing dwellings were removed from the property. So one of the concerns we have is that the continued existence of the 2 dwelling units really limits the ability of the designer to get the building located where it ought to be long term. And so basically the architect or designer on this project was having to design around leaving 2 of those dwellings in place. So obviously this would be a lot easier site to redevelop commercially if the dwellings were all removed from the site. I think you're familiar, this is a commercial corridor. It has a mix of uses, including a monument company across the street, a vacant, now closed gas station, a convenience store at the corner of Claflin and 9th, and in behind we have a mix of single-family and multi-family dwellings, and leading up to Claflin we have some dwellings to the north on the east side of 9th Street. we would indicate to you that the garden center to the south was approved by the Planning Commission as a temporary use, but basically it's eligible to be renewed every year, but they shut down. It's a seasonal business, and they have a lease arrangement with Kansas Wesleyan, so although they function every year, it's not, that property doesn't really have permanent improvements on it. So it would be for you to judge whether the building proposed by Kansas Wesleyan is similar in character to the existing commercial uses in the area. But this is a, 9th Street's an important artery for the community. It's an important commercial corridor. It's potentially the future gateway to the Kansas Wesleyan campus from 9th Street, and so we believe that the design, appearance, and location of the proposed building are important things for you to consider in your review. We've summarized for you that we've determined that 8 spaces would be required for the maintenance facility, with one of those being handicapped accessible, 2 spaces provided for each of the dwelling units. There are no issues with utilities. It's not an ideal neighborhood for drainage. There was a project that was done in the late 1990s, and a storm collection box was built from the 9th and Claflin intersection, which drains the water east over to the 2nd Street Slough. It used to go west over to Broadway. It has improved the drainage there, but the area is still subject to occasional street flooding. There's no doubt that what is being proposed here is an intensification of impervious surface, and we think that part of any responsible runoff management would be a gutter and downspout system on the building and using that to direct roof runoff where it needs to go. This is a heavily traveled arterial street that narrows down to 3 lanes between Claflin and Cloud. I think everybody in this room has probably experienced traffic congestion at that intersection at one time or another. We would also note that some of the curb cuts there on 9th Street are non-conforming as to their dimensions, and we think need to be modified. And we're also concerned about the potential traffic connection to the rear alley from the proposed parking lot. And so we've identified several alternatives for you. One would be to approve a conditional use permit for the proposed building and use, including the plan proposed with a waiver of the landscape buffer along 9th Street. We don't think that's a particularly good idea or good precedent that you might be setting. You could approve the conditional use permit, but direct the applicant to revise their plan to show a suitable landscape buffer along South 9th Street. You could postpone consideration of this request if you think you need additional information to reach a decision, or you could deny the conditional use permit application, citing the reasons for that. John, I don't know if you have the summary of the site plan corrections punch list that we have. You have these at your places, and just independent of the compatibility of the use with the surrounding area, we just wanted to focus in on this just to tell you where staff was coming from in its review. The initial plans we had were for a 60 by 125 foot building, and the proposed building was 5 feet from the north property line, and the building official indicated that that was going to need to be 10 feet to conform with the building code. And so if you make that 10 feet, you keep the building the same and move it, then that can affect other things on the property. So we understand that we've got a revised plan today that may be reducing the size of the building by 5 feet. Other areas of nonconformance on the plan that's in front of you is the C3 district requires a 10-foot building setback when a C3 zone property abuts a residential district in behind. The property to the east on Highland is zoned residential. We looked at a number of projects that were done where commercial backed up to residential, including the Green Lantern at 9th and Crawford, and we could not find another instance where we measured to the opposite side of an alley. So the rear property line for this particular property is the west line of the alley. And so the proposed building location is 5 feet from the west line of the alley. Then there's an alley in between, and the actual residential lot lines on the other side of the alley. But as the code has been applied in the past, the 10-foot setback would be measured from the west line of the alley. And as we looked at the plan, the primary reason for shifting the building or having it 5 feet from the alley instead of 10 feet away is if it was 10 feet away, then the distance between the existing dwelling at 1621 South 9th and the proposed building would probably be too tight to get vehicles between them. So that is an item of nonconformance. The lack of any front yard landscaped area on the plan was an area of nonconformance. And then the two existing driveway openings on 9th Street, one is a residential drive, the other one is commercial, but we're talking about a change of use here and a change in traffic patterns, and the north curb cut is slightly too narrow, and the south curb cut is, the approach is 8 feet too wide for the current maximum. The maximum width is 30 feet. Most commercial development that comes before the Planning Commission, the standard driveway width is 25 feet, which will give you 2 lanes for in and out traffic. And then 2 items of concern, in addition to the, we couldn't identify where the parking was for the north residential dwelling, but the 3 items of concern that aren't related to specific code requirements but are related to conditional use permit applications is we were concerned about a driveway connection to the rear alley because that alley is not paved and it's also not wide enough to have 2-way traffic on it. The width of the access aisle that leads from the front parking area to the south parking area is awfully tight, and the distance between the southwest corner of the building and the existing dwelling at 1621 is very tight, and we think it's important that a building of this size with pitched roof have a gutter and downspout system to control roof runoff and direct it to the proper place. So you are not going to find any specific recommendation in the packet as far as a recommendation for action or possible conditions of approval, because we felt like the building was either going to move or be adjusted as far as its dimensions, and then that could touch on other things, and we think that the in this particular 9th Street corridor, not addressing front yard landscaping would not be responsible on staff's part. So with that, I'd be open to any questions about staff's report, or we can put back up pictures of the plan. John, is this the revised plan that you have up there?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Dean, I do have a question, but I'm going to wander a little bit away from the nonconformities. We've talked from a planning perspective, and we've talked about that area a number of times, and the problem, the street width presents in the narrowing there, is there an opportunity here or in some other form of PDD or something to widen the street and give Wesleyan the kind of 4-lane access all the way around the school? I mean, they've got a good road in Cloud, they've got a good road in Claflin, maybe they want the campus to be Kerwin. Don't they want that wider road down the street right there? Is there any opportunity for any of that?
Well, I can tell you that Mr. Stack and his department is looking at that corridor between Cloud and Claflin, and I might let Dan kind of share with you what some of the things that engineering's been looking at there.
Yeah, we were able to get some KDOT funding to try to realign the intersection offset that's at Cloud, and definitely one of the things that we're looking at with traffic studies and turning movements is to see if extending the lanes from south of Cloud to Claflin, adding a lane in there somewhere, is definitely something we're going to be looking at. We're not sure if we do half on each side or one on just the Wesleyan side, or we're still surveying it and looking at right-of-way and where the property lines are. So it's a good point. It's something we're going to be looking at, and something that I wish we kind of had that ready, I guess. But I don't know if this plan impacts that as much, other than we'd have to take the green space that's out there between the sidewalk and the curb would become more street. So I don't know if that really impacts us as much, but it's a good point.
One of the challenges there is that the right-of-way for 9th Street north of Cloud is much narrower than the right-of-way is south of Cloud, and so if you can only build a street within the right-of-way that you have, or you've got to approach owners about granting additional right-of-way or acquiring additional right-of-way, which actually subtracts from their property. So one of the challenges there is the standard width of a right-of-way for Ohio or Magnolia or streets like that is 100 feet, and we don't have 100 feet here. We have more, I think, in the neighborhood of 70 feet total right-of-way, and so that's going to limit what you can do as far as expanding the street unless you can gain more right-of-way.
Other questions of staff? Shall we hear from the applicant? Dean, are we ready for Wesleyan to?
Unless there's no further questions of staff, then it would be appropriate to hear from the applicant's representatives.
And if you'd state your name kindly and your address, please.
My name is John Plumer. I'm a registered architect with Wilson and Company, engineers and architects here in Salina, Kansas. And I am representing Kansas Wesleyan University. And I hope this lovely crowd here isn't all here for our presentation either, so. Okay, all right. As the site plan shows presently, we've tried to address all of the issues. As a matter of fact, in the DRT meeting, we were notified of several of the issues that they had indicated, the representatives of the city had indicated. And we went ahead and addressed those on these drawings. As a matter of fact, we now have a 10-foot easement separation on the north. At the time of the DRT meeting, and Dean, correct me if I'm mistaken, thank you. Thank you. And that would be right here at this location. So we've got 10-foot setback. We still maintain a 5-foot setback because at the time of the DRT meeting, there was still some confusion as to whether or not the 10 feet was actually from the far side or from the center of the alleyway. And so we were, at the time of the completion of this particular drawing, we were under the impression that we met and complied with city regulations. So if there's still an issue there, we may have to address that. But the old building that was sitting on that site also had a 5-foot setback. And I think that was one of the reasons that we had some discussion with the city about the actual setback at that location. And there is that setback right here. There's the Crumpton building itself and the easement right in this area here. But we've maintained that 5-foot setback off of the back property line. Now, if we go back, John, for a moment. Good shot there. That was a good photograph, by the way, of other residences further to the south. This is the site plan. We've met our obligation of 8 parking stalls for the new facility, and the existing south residence also has we've met that obligation with parking. I think the one that is still of concern is where the parking for that north residence is going to be. By the way, those residences are owned by Kansas Wesleyan University and presently leased to both students and staff that use the campus. So that's the purpose. It's revenue for the university. We have maintained, we did meet criteria on this drive here. I understand that I'm still lacking a few inches in meeting the 10-foot width on the access on the north. And by the way, that will only be an exit at that location. This is a service drive to serve the facility itself. On the south side of the facility, there's an office area that houses 4 offices and some storage and public toilets. And then the rest of it is shop areas. And there is that floor plan right there. Oops. There we go. So we have the overhead door at this location and also off of the alleyway at this location. Now, the purpose for this facility will be to maintain mowing equipment and so forth for the university. And so the intent is to keep some of those mowers off of the city streets, come down the alleyway in order to gain access into the facility off the east side, and therefore the reason for the overhead door. There will be mezzanine levels over this office area as well as over these storage rooms back here off the back. There is a wash bay to wash the lawnmowers and so forth, mowing equipment. So at this point in time, I think I'll open it up to questions. I'll try to answer any questions that you might have.
Mr. Plummer, you said the primary use of the shop portion of this is for maintenance on mowers and things. Can you give us an idea of what kind of what a typical day of traffic might look like?
This is a very good question, and I do have a gentleman here that might be able to help us out. As a matter of fact, the facilities director, Mr. Darrell Victory, is here, and he might be able to give you a better idea of the daily activity.
Hi, my name is Darrell Victory of 412 Sites Drive, Director of Plant Operations, Kansas Wesleyan. The daily activity, daily traffic flow through this building would be starting around 5 a.m. We would have people coming in and just punching a clock, getting back in their vehicle and going to the building they work in. They would work at their assigned building all day. They wouldn't be back at the shop.
And how many people would that be roughly? Just
there would be about 16 people per day clocking in anywhere from 5 a.m. to 12 noon. And basically, there would only be 2, possibly 3 vehicles parked there all day long. And occasionally we would have a truck delivery, but no more than 1 a week. And that would be stretching it.
and then the mowers that go in and out, roughly how many times a day might that happen?
They would usually, in the summertime, they go out in the morning and probably not be back until 4 o'clock.
Are they mowing every day?
They're mowing pretty much every day, yes, somewhere.
And what about in the wintertime? What kind of maintenance goes on grounds-wise in the wintertime?
Wintertime is usually, well, of course, fall, we have leaves to keep cleaned up, and we do that a lot with vacuums on mowers. We do have, so we'd have some traffic there. We have parking lots to clean. When we have snow, we have sidewalks. So we do have large snow blower equipment. We have tractor with front end loader. Those type things that would be used at those times.
And that equipment would primarily use the alley for
Yes.
access? Okay. Thank you.
My questions would be, thinking of where the maintenance shop is currently, is there any screened outdoor storage for this? I'm thinking as I travel down 4th Street, there could be 4 or 5 trailers sitting there at the north end that are probably part of this facility. There are some cedars, some backhoes that have been taken off tractors and sitting kind of to the south of the football field.
Yes.
Would all that then transfer over and sit out in front of this facility for night traffic to see?
All of it would transfer over to this facility and set in the north end of the facility, and that is a chain-linked area that would be screened.
It is the intent here of the university to use screening. Now, the screening is slats that actually fit through the chain link in order to screen anything that's stored within that area. And that area will be from that point right there, 10 feet out or to the property line on the north. And you can see right here is a north elevation of that particular end of the building.
Does Kansas Wesleyan have a master plan set up for, and not speaking too far ahead there, but I think it's great what you're doing. I really do. I like that whole street, and I think it needs to be redeveloped, especially for Kansas Wesleyan. So I'm in favor of all that. I'm just thinking of, I feel like I'm voting on a hodgepodge versus if I'm leaving a couple homes up front, I'm putting a facility in the back. I don't know what's going on the side. And then with Dan, we've been talking about this strip for a little bit of time as a corridor of, of Salina. So I'm just questioning on that.
I'll make the first attempt to address your question. Yes, in fact, there has been somewhat of a master plan for the campus itself. As a matter of fact, we have gone through a redesign of the sports complex in itself. And as a matter of fact, this particular project here, it precedes that sports complex. The university is trying to gain funding for that sports complex. Presently, the maintenance and buildings and grounds staff are housed within the grandstands that sit over there. And so the first objective is to basically build this maintenance facility in order to move all of the equipment and staff into the new facility. That frees up then the sports complex. Now, I might also add that looking 20, 30 years down the road, the university is also looking at potentially using some of this property off of the 9th Street corridor for new dormitories. So, in fact, there has been preliminary thinking, master planning, if you will, of what is going to happen within that property. Obviously, the university does not own all of the property between Highland and 9th, so we don't want to tip our hand too much, but unfortunately, I spilled the beans.
And then one last question on there. At 5 a.m. of checking in, is that any concern of the neighbors behind it indoor dormitories being in there? I'm assuming lawnmowers fire up at 5 a.m. and head out for the day. Would that be not correct?
No, that's not correct. People coming in that early will just be custodians coming in to clock in at this building. That's the only time they'll ever be at this building. Lawnmowers will never start before 6 a.m. at the earliest. Usually it's going to be after 7, but when we get into 110-degree weather, they'll come in a little bit earlier.
What about the questions or concerns of staff for the buffer, the landscaping element that seems to
Very
be
good
missing?
point. In the DRT meeting, we verbally indicated, and on the plans themselves, we've indicated that the university is planning on working with the city at the time the construction is going on. They're going to hire a landscape architect and go through the process. We thought that might satisfy that particular issue, and if it doesn't, then we would be more than happy to address that. But the intent has always been to work with the city on landscaping and making sure that the city is satisfied with all landscaping issues.
For any of the members of the audience or the public that are watching, a DRT meeting is a design review team, and that's a team of staff that meets with the architect and the planners to solve some of these problems before they get to this stage.
I guess I do have one more question.
Sure.
In leaving the two front homes, if that were to be exact, how long do we believe that those would sit out there before those would go away?
In reality, they don't have an idea, I don't think, at this point. I do know that as funding becomes available, obviously the intent is to remove those two residences.
And the only reason
But-
for leaving them now is just for income potential?
Income.
For income.
That is correct, income.
Do we have an idea how old some of the oldest dormitories are over there?
You probably have a better idea than I do.
The Pfeiffer Hall would be the oldest dormitory, and the north end of it was built in 1952. The south end was added on at a later date, which I think was in the late 60s.
Thank you.
And I think Wilson Hall was probably built in the early 60s.
Yes, that's correct, but we are anticipating some growth, we hope.
Very good.
Any other questions for the applicants?
Not at this time.
There being none, we'll let the public comment. Is there anyone from the public that has questions or concerns about this application? There being none, I'll bring it back to the commission. Gentlemen, is there further comment or review or questions of the staff?
I wish to say that I do like the concept, and I think the look has some appeal and certainly could enhance that area. I think there's a lot of unanswered questions here yet, and I have a little concern that staff is not comfortable making a recommendation, so it's a little hard for me to suggest that we take action on something that has several issues that really need to be worked out, I think, at the administrative level with staff before it receives approval from here. I don't want to get into the design phase of this project at this bench. I think that needs to happen with Kent Wesleyan and our staff first. So setbacks, landscaping, the potential widening of a street may be important at some time, driveway widths, those kind of things I think need to be resolved before we take action, would be my opinion.
One option that you would have would be to have a sense of the commission, at least indicate to the applicant that you are favorable to the concept of the maintenance facility being there and whether or not you're comfortable with the two homes remaining, and then you could potentially continue this to your next meeting to allow us to work with Mr. Plumer and just fine-tune some of those items. One question that I had, John, if you could go back to the site plan. Your staff has not had an opportunity to really review these drawings, but I'm going to guess that perhaps this area has been added to be set aside as a landscape planning area, and that was not on the drawings that we had an opportunity to review. And Mr. Plumer's correct that what we talked about was at this stage, if we knew the areas that had been set aside for landscaping, that an actual planting plan could come back later, that the Planning Commission was more interested in whether areas for landscaping were being provided than into what the specific planting plan would be. But one option would be to give the applicant a sense of whether a majority of the commissioners are favorable towards the concept, and then you could postpone consideration to allow staff to work through some of those technical issues that we had identified for you.
Well, I, for one, am satisfied with the concept. Seems to me that they're of like enough mind, both the applicant and the staff, that we could move this forward. So if that is the consensus, I'd accept a motion. Yes, sir.
Wayne Schneider.
Hi, I'm Wayne Schneider. I'm the Vice President for Finance and Administration at Kansas Wesleyan University. I don't think we have any concerns about the driveway cuts or the parking. You know, our plan is already to move that extra wide opening down to a fittable 30 feet on that south end. On the north one, if it's just under 10 feet, we'll raise that to 10 feet. That is a landscape area, Dean, that you mentioned there. And we're also taking out some concrete just to the north side of that south house there. Currently it's all concrete there. We're going to take that out and add green space in that. So I think the landscaping and green space, you know, we have substantial improvement over the existing look of that block. And I know when we build our student activity center, I know the city trusted us to go in and do their landscaping around the building, and I think you've all seen our campus there. We have no intention of not doing a good job of making the area look good. I mean, it all reflects on Kansas Wesleyan and our ability to, you know, get students and retain students and be a good part of the community. So, and we also lowered the size of our building by 10 feet on that north side. We took 10 feet off of it to accommodate setback on that north side. And actually, that storage on that north side is under the roof and kind of behind the area. So I don't think, what we're thinking is there'll be no visible blight as you go down 9th Street for any type of our equipment. That's one of the reasons for the inside of the building also, is to store our equipment inside. Most of our equipment's going to be stored inside. You have certain pieces of equipment you only use once a year and things like that. And it's going to be a concreted area, so there won't be any weed growth or anything else in the area. I mean, it's going to look nice. The only surprise here today is on that 5-foot setback, because when we were at the DRT meeting, we heard two things only. One was you measure to the east side of the alleyway and take your setback from that because it's the number of feet from the residential area. Of course, we met that requirement. And another person at the meeting said, well, you come from the center and go. Well, that's 12.5 feet. We met that there. So today, that 5-foot setback and a concern of that is news to us. We were not aware of that being an issue, because when we went through our meeting, that was all seemingly okay. So that is a surprise. But if you do look at the picture of that alleyway and all the houses and all the stuff, it's all at that line. We're not out of line in conjunction with all the other facilities and buildings and fencing and everything else on that back side. And we are trying to move it as close to the east as we can, because just like they're saying, we think at some point that road might be expanded. That's going to take part of your front yard away. And if that occurs, you know, we're setting it up so, you know, you never know what's on the other side of the street. It might be more advantageous for the city to come on our street. So if we do that by setting it back closer to the alley, we have more room for that street expansion if and when it may occur. We're also putting in all new sidewalk all along that area. You know, I think it's going to be a really, really good enhancement to the area. We're in somewhat of a time crunch. I mean, we want to get our building ordered, get it placed, do our demolition work, and get it started so we can get in there before winter. You know, we get a little busy at the start of school. I hope that doesn't hold us up, but we want to have some sort of improvement. So if there's any way to approve that here now, I mean, we'd really appreciate that.
Wayne, the downspouts and gutters, is that any kind of issue for you at all?
It's not to me. That's a new one too. I mean, we put our elevation up, and there's some concern about draining. We're trying to get it all to drain to 9th Street, and I know John, with his civil engineers, we've got a program to move that through there to 9th Street. It creates a little bit of problem on that north end where that existing house is, because it's very close to the house on the other side of it. You know, there's only about 7-8 feet between them two houses. So we're talking about banking some dirt and stuff where we have dirt space over in that area, and moving that through. If they, we told them if the engineer can't make that happen, we'll do the downspout and bury a line from there out to the street and just take it underground and get out to it. That's why we want the building up a little, so we have a little slope, so we can do that and get our drainage off it. But we don't want to run any water to the north, and that's the only area of concern, I think, is on that north side.
Dean, how does that statute read then? Is it from the property line, or is it from the center of the alleyway, or is it to the residential abutment?
And John, I don't even want to go to one of the photographs of the alley that might be the most helpful. If we were on South 9th Street, south of, say, Magnolia, where it backs up to Highland, and you've got Sonic Drive-In and some of those uses that back up to residential. You don't have an alley, so you would measure from the back of the building over to this residential property line. And what Kansas Wesleyan was asking us and you as a commission to do is count the alley, which is publicly owned, as part of the setback area, and measure from here to here, which is 20 feet. 15 foot of alley and 5 foot of building setback. So the net effect is that the wall of that building would be 20 feet from the residential lot line. You can make that interpretation that the intent is to have a buffer or cushion between the wall of a commercial building and the adjacent lot line. So if you look at where the Dillon's store is being built and it has residential abutting to the north, there is no alley there, and there's no alley back where you have Sunflower Carpet or Sonic or any of those. So you would measure from here to this point, because this would be part of the commercial lot. So if that is acceptable, then you would just need to indicate that you are willing to credit them with the alley as part of their buffer setback, because the net effect would be the same. If that alley was not there, then the building could be located where it was, as long as this alley was part of their property.
That was my question, is how the language read on the code. Do we have an indication from the code where we're supposed to measure from?
It just says that a setback shall be provided of that specified amount.
Between the residential property and the commercial property?
It just says a
building.
building setback. And as a general rule of thumb, you measure a building setback from that property's property line.
Right.
But the intent is to create a separation from the closest a commercial building can be to a residential line. So if this alley was not here and Kansas Wesleyan owned this strip right here, then this is 20 feet from the residential lot line, which meets the intent of the code. The code doesn't specify where to measure to, but if you had commercial to commercial, the setback requirement is 0. if you have commercial to residential, then there's a minimum setback, and the purpose of the minimum setback is so you don't build a Dillon store or a commercial type use that butts right up to a residential lot line.
Okay, and are any of the residences we're talking about not owned by Westland?
Yes.
It's the northern.
And all those were notified in this?
Yes.
But even if we were to try and move this through, and we gave them that variance, I don't believe the notification given to the people on the front side of Highland probably knew that we were asking for a variance.
Well, the letter that went out was included the site plan, and it showed the pictures of the building and where it would be located and all of that. So someone who on Highland who would have gotten a letter would have seen a picture of the size and location of the proposed building.
So you're saying we have control, or we have the availability to grant him, giving that if we believe that there is a 25-foot buffer if you're going from the back of the building structure to the next structure, which would be the property line.
If you
Fence.
view we're telling you that the intent of that is to keep a buffer or separation between the wall of a commercial building and the residential lot line. And that's what the intent is. If you believe that that's accomplished by counting the 15-foot of the alley as part of that, then that's an interpretation that can be made.
Dean, two things. One is the utility lines, I assume there's a utility easement through there as well.
No, it's just a 15-foot alley. Those poles are in the alley.
So there's no requirement of the 7.5 foot or whatever on the other side of the poles then?
No, it's a 15-foot wide alley that's owned by the city of Salina, and the alley in the olden days served as what a utility easement does today.
But my question is, if they build within 5 foot of the edge of the alley, then that gives them the required space from the utility lines to their building? There's a certain minimum that has to be, isn't there?
They would
Or not?
be 5 feet from the edge of the alley, so they would not be encroaching on any utility corridors or anything, because the utilities have to be in the alley.
Okay, I just know in some places you have to be farther away from that, from your overhead utility lines.
You cannot have any part of a building in or overhanging an easement, and at 5 feet, no part of this building
Okay.
would be in or overhanging any utility easement.
And then the second question, if the residences that are presently owned to the east of the alley wish to build say they wish to build a garage, can they set their garage right on the property line then as well?
No, that's the part that is missed in all the discussions and all the discussion we had about the 5 feet and everything else, is if the people across the way or somebody on this side wanted to build a residential garage and they wanted to have a door that faced the alley, that would have to be 10 feet off the property line, and the purpose of that is so that you can make a turn from the alley and get into the garage. So it's actually the
And this got a garage door on the back side
the
of it?
10 feet that we were emphasizing in our reports is that anybody else that built a garage that had a garage door facing the alley, it would have to be 10 feet off the alley. The difference is this is not a residential accessory garage. This is a principal building. It's not a garage, it's a maintenance facility, but we wanted to at least point that out, that if somebody built a brand new garage over here, or there was a residential lot up here and they built a brand new garage and they had a door that faced the alley for alley access, that would have to be set back 10 feet from the alley.
But yet this garage entrance for this facility does not have to be.
Well, we're bringing that to this is not a garage, it's not an accessory building. We're simply pointing out that the 10 feet that we were bringing up in our report is based on that, because this building has an overhead door that faces the alley.
Most of these issues of the clearance and the placement of the building could easily be moved 5 feet west if the south house weren't there, or if you chopped 5 or 10 feet off the existing southern house. How critical to the university is that southern house for the short term? I mean, for the long term, you've already said it's not going to be there, depending on whenever the university could get control of more property in the area. But sure looks like a lot of the problems would be solved if you could agree to remove that south house with this project. I mean,
Well, I'm sure it's important to the person living there.
but they're just
And
tenants.
it's important to us for our finances. I mean, it has importance on both. And, you know, we can't predict the future, what's going to happen out in front of us. You know, I think we all want an improved 9th Street. I don't deny that.
That would sure be a big
And,
help if you could
and
eliminate
I-
at least one of those two houses, and both of them ideally.
well, we are taking the one out there in the middle.
Yeah, but I'm talking, all three would really solve the problem.
You know, if we had endless supply of funds, I'm sure that would be easy to say yes to, Abner. but-
Okay, so it's a brilliant concept for conserving cash flow
Yes.
with what's there until
Yes, that
better
is true.
situation arrives.
And Wayne, while you're thinking about that, where, on the north house, though, where would the person park still if we're leaving it as a tenant? Just as
So
another
it's
thing to
going
think
to
about.
park there behind the house to the east side of it. We have some concrete there. Right now, they park behind the house. It has a shared drive that goes between the house we're tearing down and that house now, and they both just come in and park behind the homes.
Okay.
That would continue only on a paved area. I think we're talking about,
I agree with you on
or to the north of that, right in there.
granted exception.
Yeah.
When they could just move that house out.
Yeah.
Clear the whole area.
Just cut
As much as I would,
10 feet off that house.
as much as I would like to make the motion to move it forward, there's just, I don't even know if I could put enough conditions on there of, I mean, I'm just so lost on driveways and setbacks, and, I mean, typically something comes in front of us, it's all put together, staff approves it, they give us the okay, we feel it's okay, and we're okay. I really don't even know, I like the project, I think Kansas Wesleyan has a great name and a great, in the community, I think they'll do a great job, but I don't even know where to start to get you going. I mean, based on what's there. I believe that the 5 foot, if staff says it needs 10 foot to turn in for residential, even though you don't need one, I'm hoping everybody understands you can turn a trailer, I guess, into 5 feet to get equipment in and out of there. But I don't know.
We have in the past, Dean, we have in the past given preliminary approval to a plan and suggested that the architect go back and work out some of these conditions with staff. And I am comfortable that Kansas Wesleyan is a good steward of the community and that they would be able to do this. I think the biggest issue for me is going to be the 5-foot setback in the alley, whether that to me is the only deal right now that I'm having any kind of problem with. I think all of the rest of those things that staff could work out. Dean, do you think that's an accurate statement?
Well, a clarification of whether the overhead door on the alley face is just for lawnmowers and things like that makes a big difference of whether you're driving motor vehicles in there, and if it were limited to mowers and pieces of equipment and things like that, then the need for the 10 foot for turning vehicles would be a difference, and we haven't got, I guess, John, if you could go back to the site plan, one of the items that we felt needed clarification that's come up at other times when we have an alley that doesn't support two-way traffic is, one of the concerns is that this is so tight right here that the majority of traffic using these spaces here may choose to use the alley. And if they choose to use the alley and they're coming in there or they're going out, are we going to make the alley a one-way alley so that cars that exit from here are directed to go north because they can't go south, or they're directed to go south because they can't go north because a 15-foot alley does not allow for two-way traffic. And it would be best if everyone that used this lot entered and exited from Ninth Street, and that was one of the items in our concern category.
If I may, there's 2 points of discussion here. One has to do with the alley access to the shop area. It is Kansas Wesleyan's intent to use that strictly for mowers. Other vehicles will not be gaining access to that building, and that is a shop area. So that is the intent, strictly for mower access off of the east side of that building. Second point of discussion here, I think, is circulation and so forth. This drawing obviously is a site plan, and it is a construction document, so you're not probably seeing a lot of what's happening there, but there's a patch of concrete that we're leaving in the south side of that, where that arch or curve is next to the building. Well, that's all existing concrete, and so that will remain in place. Yes, if we were to shift the building 5 feet further to the west to gain or to provide the 10-foot buffer as requested there, it would narrow the throat between the south residence and the shop building itself in order to gain access to the parking. It's inadvisable at this point, I guess, is what I would be saying there. We were under the impression early on that because the existing shop that sits there now, which is Crumpton Restoration and Cleaning, they have a 5-foot, and of course we were under the same impression, and it wasn't until today's meeting that we found out differently. So I guess that would be a third point.
And the Crumpton building has no back door at all, as I recall.
Correct. That is correct.
Well, one option, and I would suggest that it be done at the end of the meeting and not at this time, but as Mr. Chairman knows, one of the options that the commission has is to recess into closed session and try to develop findings and potential conditions of approval, if that is the commission's desire, because this open forum here is not particularly conducive to developing those in a public hearing format. But if that's one of the things that the commission desires, you would have an opportunity to move on to other agenda items, and at the end of your agenda you would have the opportunity, if you so desired, to recess into closed session if you wanted to try to flesh out some potential findings or conditions for a formal motion.
Well, gentlemen, for one, I'm comfortable with 5-foot setback, and if it needs to be limited to just the mowers, maybe we could try to get ourselves a motion here to, or a consensus among us. If that item can pass us, can we move this forward, or would you
I'd make a
prefer-
motion, or I'd be ready to make a motion if you're ready to hear one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'd make a motion to approve the conditional use permit to allow construction of a new maintenance shop facility in the C3 district with the conditions that were given in front of us of the item of nonconformance that city staff would work with Kansas Wesleyan on items 1, 2, and 3. I do feel comfortable with the 5-foot setback, knowing that there's a 25-foot buffer from the back of it to the existing line, and adding that allowing only for mowing vehicles to be ingress, egress out of the back door at this time.
I'd second that motion.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It passes. Okay. Thank you very much. Next item, number 3, application Z12-2, filed by the Salina City Planning Commission, requesting an amendment to the official zoning map the City of Salina for the purpose of mapping the newly established public use educational facilities zoning class.
Mr. Chair,
Staff?
I'm going to recuse myself from this particular part.
Okay,
so
thank you.
Represent the
Ken?
district.
Just by way of the background, the road map that we set out for ourselves here, the comprehensive plan that was adopted for the City of Salina recommended that a public use zoning district or zoning classification, which did not previously exist in our zoning ordinance, be created and adopted, with the primary focus of that being the public facilities owned by the City of Salina and Saline County, and also the public properties owned and operated by the Salina School District. And back in March of 2012, the City Commission, upon your recommendation, created a new public use zoning district. That was followed up with some discussion and recommendations about sign regulations that ought to apply in that district. You made some recommendations on that, and last night the City Commission approved those. Now that the content of the actual district has been finalized and adopted by yourselves and the City Commission, the final step is to go and look at the community and say which properties and which facilities inside the city limits should be reclassified from their current zoning designation to public use. And we gave you a wide variety of examples that we've discussed on a number of cases. We had a discussion of the corner lot at Marymount and Crawford and what its zoning should be, and many commissioners were surprised that the fire station was zoned single-family residential. Many of you would be surprised that we have water tower sites, we have the city's water treatment plant, are all zoned residential. And the vast majority of our school sites are zoned residential. And the areas that you see represented in blue or purple there are all USD 305 properties that we have identified as potential candidates for public use zoning as opposed to their current zoning. And so what we did to carry that out was discuss that with you initially, and then we sent out letters to all property owners who own property within 200 feet of a USD 305 school property, and indicating that there was a possible zoning reclassification of those school properties that would be considered at a public hearing by the Planning Commission today. So I wanted to do two things, if I could, John. We have a list that shows the list of schools and what they're currently zoned. You have the schools list. Okay, this is the list of schools for which notification was provided, and you can see that the majority of the school sites are zoned residential, and R1 designates single-family residential. So if you looked at a zoning map for the City of Salina today and tried to identify where Central High School campus was, you would see a yellow designated area that looks just like the surrounding single-family neighborhood. And so what is being suggested here by staff is that it would be more appropriate to have a zoning classification for our schools that represented how the property is actually owned and used, as opposed to residential, which is not very reflective of what it's used for. The other thing that's been a challenge for staff and planning commissions and city commissions is you've got a set of rules in the R1 district that is designed for construction of housing, and we're taking those rules and applying them to school district projects, and that doesn't work well all of the time. And so the other thing I'd like you to put up, John, is do you have the comparison of the R1 and single family zoning and the public use zoning. So this highlights the differences of what we have today versus what would be the case with a public use district. And if you are in a residential district and you have a school, then that school is a conditional use, which means that an expansion or a modification or converting additional property would require a conditional use permit for changes that the school district might wish to make, and a notice and a public hearing for that. What we're suggesting is that most of the neighbors already know that it's a school, that it's a school use, and if it's zoned for school use, then anything that the school district would be primarily engaged in, which would be playgrounds, parking, minor school additions, storage buildings, things of that nature, they would simply be permitted uses. Just like they are, you can build a garage on your residential lot as a permitted use, you can put a shed on there as a residential use, you can add on to your driveway, and you don't have to get a conditional use permit to do that. So the thinking is everybody knows it's a school, it's a public use, and so those activities would be permitted. The minimum lot area that schools have to have would not change. The minimum lot width would not change. The lot depth would increase in the public use district. Two items that would be of primary interest is that the maximum lot coverage would increase. This is more indicative of what you would have with a single-family home than what you'd have on a school campus, and the maximum building height would increase. And then there's a greater allowance for coverage of the site with impervious surface like parking or asphalt or concrete playground areas that you wouldn't have on a conventional residential lot. You concurred with what the setback requirements would be 25 feet across the board, and the other change would be that schools would be allowed to have the signs that the public use district allows, as opposed to having residential sign rules apply to schools. And so we keep talking about schools, but the long-term plan is that all the city's parks, the neighborhood centers, the fire stations, the golf course, all the Salina Bicentennial Center, the fairgrounds, all of those would eventually get reclassified to public use from their current classification. But we decided to bite this off in bite-sized chunks, and so we have started with these school district sites. So the purpose of the public hearing is to allow interested property owners surrounding schools to ask questions about how that might potentially impact their property. And the primary difference is that for a majority of school projects, as long as they stayed within the bounds of their existing school campuses, that their activities would be permitted uses, not conditional. And that would be the primary difference. And some of those are, but they're already permitted, but they're grandfathered in. But my example would be is if the school district got rezoning for the Oakdale School campus to public use, they could build their school, their parking lots, their playgrounds, and they wouldn't have to come before the Planning Commission to get their specific plans approved if they had the zoning in place already. That would be the primary difference. And so we had sent out, by our count, 735 property owner letters. The other thing that we are recommending, our initial list, I think we had 13 properties. We reduced that, and just to avoid any dissimilarities, we are recommending that the Glenifer Hill, former Glenifer Hill property, which is the USD 305 offices, be set aside at this time and taken up at a later time, as that's not purely an educational facility. But I do know that some of the conversations that we had, and I don't think, John, have any, do you have a sample map that has the rings on them? The notification maps? One of the questions or concerns that came up frequently is that all of our letters that went out, this is the area of ownership that received notification of a potential change in zoning. And there were many property owners who received the letter and interpreted that as the school district had eyes on this property or were attempting to go out and acquire it, and that is not the case. That line simply represents the area of influence around that school where people needed to be notified. So there was some thoughts on the letters that went out that this line around each of the schools represented property that the school district was attempting to acquire or expand into, and none of this involves expansion of any of the school sites. All of the areas that are discussed for rezoning would simply be the existing school campus as it exists today. This is the Schilling Elementary School campus. These are all residential properties around it. This property here is owned by the city of Salina, and then this is the Stone Creek subdivision right there, which is also residential property. But none of this involves any expansion of the ownership or the facilities themselves. It's just to take the existing school sites and say, we think that these ought to be zoned and identified as public use properties and not as residential properties. So that is our best summation. And just like anything else, when you're any type of proposal to change the zoning classification on the property, it requires notification of neighboring property owners and a public hearing, and that's what we're holding today to get input on that. And of course, we'd also want input from USD 305, since they are the property owners, of whether that new zoning classification is of interest or benefit to them. But this is the final step in the process. Was if you've got a new zoning district on the books, we went through the same process with the Salina Regional Health Center. We developed a new set of zoning district regulations called Hospital Medical District, and then the Planning Commission had a hearing and said, okay, what property in Salina should have that zoning designation, and a good deal of property on South Santa Fe was changed from residential to hospital medical, and this is very similar.
The questions of staff or other remarks? I think it'd be appropriate if we heard from any representatives of the school district and their feelings about these 12 properties, or 13 minus 1.
Thank you. Ken Kennedy, 1204 Martin Avenue, and also Assistant Superintendent for USD 305. And I would address a few comments, but also I'm interested in hearing what the patrons that are here this afternoon have to say, because we want to be sensitive to their concerns and questions they may have. So I'm hopeful we can be helpful in answering some of their questions, as well as making a few comments. I think as you try to picture this, and I feel like I need to be facing the audience a little bit, but because we've had some discussions about it as a planning commission, about the advantages, disadvantages, the changes, and what might happen. I think to sum it up, if you want to visualize what might be happening, if you look at our school sites as they are today, I think the permitted uses, that's about what they would look like under permitted uses. Athletic fields at the secondary sites, stadium at Salina Central, the various outdoor recess areas, the parking lots, et cetera, are all important and part of the operation of a school, without a doubt, including some of our school sites have shared parks with the city and those type of things. We own the site. The park is used by the city and the community, and we intend for it to stay that way. But understand, at some time when that school need to be expanded, and if it didn't need to be expanded, we may have to encroach on some of that park for the expansion of a school. But I don't see significant changes to what we have today, other than maybe expanding schools, and we would hope with growth of a community that might need to happen. The other thing that's interesting, and what Dean alluded to, and I want to be a little more, when I first came here and started working with the district, it is really cumbersome to work with school development under residential rules. They're just so different in the type of construction, the parking requirements. It's like starting over every time. And when you think of, for example, Salina Central, I think my first indication of the differences was I called the city to see if I could have a small storage shed brought in for a Stang Booster Club to use, and we have 4 of them under Salina Stadium. And at that time I was told, well, you have about 6 too many already, and because residential has limits on the number of detached buildings that you can have. And of course at Salina Stadium we have a different need than that. But so that's a more extreme example. The other is the fact that permitted uses are what we presently have mostly. Conditional uses, such as a significant departure from what we're presently doing, as I understand it, would still need to come before the city as well as the Planning Commission for approval. So if anything radically changed in the way we were using that facility, I think my understanding of the zoning, it would still need to come before the commission. I want to reemphasize to the patrons that are here and make sure I'm clear on the understanding that, again, that circle that was drawn around the map is not an indication of the desire of the district to acquire additional property for growth. We have some property already in the south part of Salina that's owned, 23 acres, that's owned by the city. Should we ever need to grow, we'd be looking at that. That's not included in this. But as far as acquiring property around our existing school sites, that was not the intent of the district, nor the intent of this rezoning by any means, nor will the zoning change, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dean, on any of the property surrounding the school, only the school property.
The shaded areas for each of those, which only property that's currently owned by USD 305.
Exactly. So with that, I'd answer any questions of the commission, and certainly we look forward to hearing from the patrons that may have questions or concerns or support.
The efficiency of making things permitted instead of conditional, that obviously saves you a lot of time and taxpayers' money in the preparations that you have to pass through to get those things accomplished, right?
It does, and helps with our long-range planning. We can say, yes, we can at least plan to do this, and not knowing that we have to get all these various endorsements prior to any long-range planning.
With that being said, Ken, does USD 305 approve of these sites that are being proposed for this rezoning at this point in time?
I talked to our Board of Education about this at their last meeting, and we tabled our action on this until we heard from the various patrons that may be at this meeting, because we want to be sensitive to their input to decide what I might recommend to our Board of Education at their meeting next Tuesday, so a week from tomorrow night. And I did tell our board I would bring comments from this meeting back to the board, and at that time I'll make a recommendation to our board, and then they'll choose to act on it however. And then at that point, if it's all 12 sites, then we would call the city and say we would like to proceed with all 12 of those sites, or it may be a selected group of sites, depending on what we hear this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Other questions? Then I'll listen to the other
And Dan?
comments.
We'd like to take the public's comments. Are there questions that the public would like to ask? And merely if there are a lot of you, you can stand in a line, but if you'd come individually to the podium, sir, you can step up first. Please give us your name for the record and your address, if you will, please.
Sure. My name is Christopher Hernandez, and I live at 1503 Stapler Avenue. And basically, instead of representing my particular land, I'm actually representing due process. And what I mean by due process is to discuss what we actually went through just with Kansas Wesleyan. There was the discussion among a group. Residents had the opportunity to be here and weren't here. And you guys had to make the hard decision to pass it through. From the letter that I received, and actually I have packets that I prepared for you guys, because I don't have a cool computer over like that to bring everything up, so I want everybody to have what I have. Here you go, sir. Here you go, sir. Here you go, sir. For yourself.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And for yourself.
Thank you.
Do you guys need one as well? Because I know you were working on things on computers in your room. Would you like one as well? Sure. And one for yourself.
I forgot it.
And one for
Did you catch his name?
So if anybody happened to come back, and Mr. Kennedy, I think you came up. What were you? I'm sorry. There you go, sir.
Has he been in any of these districts?
Now, it is not my intent to negate what's trying to be accomplished. The biggest thing that I find important is that people retain their rights. And when I was going through the zoning process, which honestly I went through with you a number of years ago on a conditional use, when I was tutoring out my home, now that I'm a family man, my home is all back to residential. So I learned a lot about the zoning process in that way, using this same brochure. Now, my first question, as you turn to the first part of the packet, step 1, in the second paragraph, it says, if you are requesting the same zoning on non-contiguous areas, each of these will be considered as separate requests. Now, I've heard through just what Mr. Kennedy said, and I also heard through May 15th minutes that I've read and observed and have with me, that it is not necessarily the intent for the entire school, USD 305, to do it all at once. They could do it piece by piece. Now, if that's the case, then that meant that each of these should have been submitted as separate applications. Am I correct or incorrect in that?
I would ask the staff.
Yes, sir.
to advise us
That
on
would be
that.
incorrect from the
Okay.
standpoint that the Planning Commission or the City Commission may initiate the rezoning of any number of properties in the city of Salina at one time. But you are correct from the standpoint that's indicated in the Planning Commission's report on page 2, that the Planning Commission may recommend that one or more of the school properties not be placed in the public use district, or they can recommend that no school properties be placed, so that each site, each school site stands on its own merits. And so from that standpoint, each of the properties is individual. They each had their own notice, and the Planning Commission may choose to recommend that all or half or one or any number of those school properties be placed in a public use district, so each school site stands on its own merits. So
So
for efficiency purposes, the Planning Commission can initiate all of them, but each one of them stands on its own.
Okay. So again, I hear the word efficiency, and we'll remove things through. So that presents to the next question, which if you look at on the next page is the actual schedule for processing zoning map changes. And then you guys also have the full case. I'm going to skip a couple lines to where it starts, a few back in your packet. You have the actual case item number 3 that was presented on the hearing of May 15th that you guys approved at the beginning of today. The filing date was April 19th, 2012. If that happened, they missed the filing deadline for April 13th. So they should never have had a hearing on May 15th for that. There was a part of the process that was skipped. And like I said, my intent is not to this. I'm trying to show the importance of how the city needs to be involved, us citizens need to be involved, the departments need to be involved. So when you guys heard that on the actual filing deadline, it says April 19th, 2012. And then you went ahead and said that your hearing would have been May 15th, 2012. Now, for what I learned is that everything has to go through a process. So the hearing that was had, that probably nobody was in attendance to, I don't honestly know how many attended that particular one. I have the minutes, but it doesn't, maybe I just didn't find that particular fact. Was there, question for you guys, was there a lot of people at the May 15th
I
meeting?
want to kind of cut through just
Yes,
a
sir.
little bit of this, and I'm sorry, I don't remember your name.
No, that's okay. Mr. Hernandez or
Okay, Mr.
Christopher.
Hernandez. Are you suggesting some kind of illegal action by this board? Is that
No,
what you're...
no, sir.
What is your goal, then?
My goal is for us to understand that when we move things from the P zone, while meant to rezone property, it also takes away the rights, and the actual letter that people received, it takes away our right to, and I'm skipping on to the May 14th letter that we received. There will be no notification of neighboring property owners. No public hearing would be required. The city is actually, the city planning commission would not even review or approve. So the process that you guys just went through with Kansas Wesleyan wouldn't necessarily even have to happen with any of us here. You guys could do
But it
that
did
on your own.
happen.
I'm sorry?
But it did happen.
Yes, sir. Yes, exactly. Yes, sir.
There are, however, rules and regulations for anything that is done.
Yes, sir.
And so we've already approved those conditions, those rules and regulations that the school must follow, just like anybody else has.
Okay.
It's not a matter of taking away rights. It's a matter of putting the rights in place so they can be followed. Right now, you're trying to follow a residential rules, regulations, guidelines, permitting processes, et cetera.
Yes, sir.
And you're putting a public use facility and trying to mesh those two together. We have now put in place rules, regulations, obligations, permit processes and everything. We're not taking that out and just saying, USD 305, you can do whatever you want. It's your property. We don't care anymore.
Well, no, I don't
at
think
all.
you.
We put those rules and regulations around a facility that actually is being used there today. So rather than trying to put those against a residential property, which has never been on that situation, we are now holding the applicant to a new set of regulations that better reflect or more closely reflect the actual use of the site. There is no restriction of rules and regs, or
And this came
Go ahead.
out about 3 years ago. We went through a
2009?
a comprehensive plan.
Okay.
And we decided there were some areas that didn't reflect the actual usage of the property, even though they were zoned as such. So this action is just primarily to come up with an accurate description and an accurate zone of what the property is actually being used for, instead of one that encumbers the school and the public,
I see.
and the planning department.
Well, I guess I'm still a bit confused at why this first meeting wasn't today, based on I know Kansas Wesleyan followed with their deadline, and we, I guess it was an oversight that you guys had a May 15th meeting, and that's what I'm talking about, is like the way to hold each other accountable. So you're going to be able to give USD 305 more, maybe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, jurisdiction to make changes. However, those changes affect the residents, because that reflects property, property taxes, so the valuation of the value of the homes. That affects the neighborhood itself. And I'm just thinking about all the different districts I went to and did walk-bys and got different vicinity maps to learn.
Okay, let me ask you.
Yes, sir.
Is there a specific item that you can say that you thought that the school district had acted in a detrimental fashion that devalued some of the property around it or something? Is that what you're getting at?
No, what I'm saying is we don't know the future, sir.
We certainly don't.
Right. And so the future, I think, needs to still have the residential rights involved. And so I don't see how the residents are being represented if they decided to make school additions, say they added on property, they added them. Yes,
This
sir?
district doesn't give them carte blanche to do whatever they want to do. They still have a very specific set of guidelines that they have to live within. And certainly if they do anything out of those guidelines, those come before the Planning Commission in the form of a conditional use permit.
But-
Dean, could you address that a little better?
Well, I think the primary thing, the point was made best by Commissioner Birdsong, is that it's like trying to fit a round ball into a square box at times. You have limits on garage sizes, you have the limits on the number of storage buildings that are designed for a 8,000 square foot residential lot, and you're applying those to a 30-acre high school campus. And so there are two sides to that, and I see Mr. Hennenkamp was at least here for a portion of this, but he could speak to that as well as anyone. And there's always a balance, and there was a balance, but we had a period of time where the Salina Regional Health Center was trying to do projects, and sometimes they had to go to 4 different city boards and have their projects reviewed. And so the approach we took is, let's take out an area of the community that everybody agrees is an area where the hospital has facilities, is going to maintain facilities, and here's the set of rules that they have to abide by within that area. And as long as their projects that they submit stay within those parameters, then they are permitted uses. And if they want to build a medical office building, they don't need to go to the Planning Commission. If they want to modify this, they don't need to go to the Planning Commission because they're staying within their parameters. And we're taking that same approach with schools, and we're only talking about schools today. We're going to be talking about fire stations and parks and community centers and all of that, because the public use better reflects what the property is used for. As to the specific of the schedule that you have in front of you, the schedule that we're operating under for this case today was a filing deadline of May 4th, which was met by filing it before that, a deadline for advertising this hearing in the Salina Journal on the 10th of May, which was done. It was duly published in the Journal on May 15th, and all property owner letters were mailed on the 14th ahead of that deadline. So there was no public hearing on the 15th. The advertised public hearing was set for today, and all adequate notice was provided of today's hearing. But that is essentially correct, that under this approach, as long as the school district has a project and it stays on the school district campus and it conforms with the parameters set out in the public use district, that they would be issued permits to build those projects, and there would not be public hearings for that.
Mr. Hernandez?
Yes, sir.
To turn this around.
Sure, please.
You said you were a property owner, residential property owner?
Yes, sir.
There are certain things that you can do on your property that are permitted. You don't have to tell your neighbors, you don't have to tell the city, you don't have to tell anybody. They're permitted uses.
Yes, sir.
And you have that right as a property owner. That's all we're doing with this public use district. In other words, there are, again, certain things that can be done that fall within, we've had many discussions about this in open public meetings about what could and should be done on these properties. They're already being done on these properties, parking lots, school facilities, et cetera, that we've already mentioned. So if that helps you to understand, we're giving them really the same abilities for their properties as you have as a residential owner on your property, again, within the guidelines of the zoning.
Okay. Well, my property is on here, and I know there's other ones that have parks. There's, as we said, we don't necessarily know what happens in the future, but what we're saying is that between the public schools, they would be able to come to you with their permitted, well, if they have permitted uses, they could do what they wanted to do within their new allotments. And residents, nobody would receive any letters, everything would just kind of happen. And then on the other side of it, if there was conditional uses, that would be where they come to you, but the residents and other people that live in the city who are paying, the taxes on these things are happening that maybe the people don't agree with, but then they no longer really have a voice. And that's what I'm trying to see if that's going to be maintained or that's going to be lost, because the way I interpret it is that it'll all be done just between those individual groups. So public
If it
school
falls outside the permitted uses, if
Yes.
they want a conditional use,
Mm-hmm.
that will come back through the same process as before. There will be notification, there will be public hearings, et cetera.
So, for example, I saw up there, someone put up that the 60 feet, a building can be built 60 feet high
Right.
under a permitted use. For instance, I live right across from Glenfrey Hill Park. Technically, a building could erect there 6 stories high.
Right.
Correct? Within permitted
Not
use.
6 stories high, 60 feet.
Well, it
60
could be
60
6
feet.
stories high.
Which is 6 stories high.
Okay, I see. Excuse me.
And,
I'm just trying to make sure I'm clear on this.
and let me,
Yes, sir.
let me give you one more avenue. too.
Please.
As a former school board member, you have the right to be heard by the school board if in fact you have a legitimate claim that you don't want this 60-foot tall building being built across the street from your house. You call the school board office, you get on the agenda, you be heard by the school board, and then you make your wishes known to them as a taxpayer and as a neighbor. And the
So it would be a different form of due process.
exactly.
Okay. So, so then I would be receiving a letter of notification. I mean, if they did conditional uses, they would have to send me a letter. I don't know the school board's laws, if they're the same as our city. Would I receive notification? Because basically, I mean, only in getting the letter is how I learned about this. And really, I'm all for, increasing playgrounds. I know that you guys, Mr. King Kennedy, was wanting to have playgrounds for middle school because they want to get more sports involved. Sure. I mean, I'm aware of that. And so I think some of those are great ideas. But I also know that if there's not really a checks and balances, which I feel is going to be a little bit more removed, I mean, by us having people here that are all here for the same thing, maybe not. Maybe they thought their poems were going to be destroyed. Because honestly, when I went door to door, I got the same thing. And I had to explain to them that's not the case. It just means that you won't have a say in what's built on their land. Because you would only have a say if they went into a conditional use format. But there's certain new permitted uses that they would have that the residents, the property owners surrounding it, and I mean, we sent, like you said, 700 people for different school districts, but we have about 40,000 people over here in the city. So
Well, you
I'm just
keep mentioning due process, and
No, go ahead.
in due process, in my estimation, is if you want to ensure your due process rights, you hire an attorney and you get them to represent those rights in a court of law.
Sure.
I don't think that the sheer fact that Mr. Kennedy has asked not to have all of these schools included until everyone was heard is a good indicator that the USD 305 is very aware and very sensitive to the needs and the uses and the desires of the patrons. And I don't think that they're going to build a 60-foot tall building across the street from your house without some kind of public notification and some kind of public involvement about the plans and the way that the thing looks.
I guess what I'm trying to learn, and that's why I've done this, like I said, there's different places where it's failed, and maybe other people have other questions too, is I think just the residents would like to know that they still have rights, because like the meeting like that occurred previously, we all were here, but unfortunately there was no one to represent that land, and you guys made motion and it followed the rules, and that's the way it went down. When we've made significant changes to the public use district, which is a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 plan, everybody can control different parts, and they're going to be able to work within those individual parts as long as they work within their new permitted use rights. Correct, sir?
Again, you're talking about rights. I don't.
Well, I'm just saying, like, I'll avoid the word rights. That permitted, there's new permitted uses, and so USD 305, while we're doing that hurdle first, there's plans like was mentioned for the fire department, police department, that they would all be rezoned, and by rezoning it, they would control it, and if they worked within their new permitted uses, then the residents couldn't have any say of what happens. Well, it still kind of affects them.
I think that you're missing the point that
Okay.
you would have an ability to express your concerns to the school board.
For the school board, okay.
Yes. All we're doing is streamlining a process that already exists. Right now, the process is cumbersome for hospitals and public facilities like schools to do these type of things just because of the zoning that they're in. And one of the things that we noted when we did the comprehensive plan, and this is not just something that
No, you
Salina
guys have been
has-
working on a long time. I mean, you guys have done a fantastic job on it.
This is not something that has happened just in Salina overnight. We just decided, well, hey, we're going to change some zoning classification. This is happening all across the country, and it's to give people an accurate idea of what's going on in these zones, and also to give a master plan for how things can be built and how things can look in Salina and other communities.
So since this is my first, second time ever being up here, will there be new ways that the residents are notified under the new zoning districts when it goes to conditional uses? Within USD 305 board handling their stuff, and I'm assuming the city, Salina City, will have the parks, and these are just assumptions because the other ones haven't happened yet. Will there still be a place for the people to speak for and against those things, receive notifications when they are going into the conditional uses? Has all of that been accounted for so the resident still has their voice to be heard?
Of course it has, and I would point out to you that it's somewhat your responsibility to pay attention to what's going on. There are more forms of notification than a letter that goes directly to the owner of the property. There's notifications put in the paper. We have complied with all process here. Staff could have made a technical error, I doubt it, but all of those things have been in motion for the better part of a year and a half, and they've been reviewed and published as they're appropriately supposed to. And if you have further issues about due process, then possibly the courts are a place to take that. But as the chairman of the Planning Commission, is satisfied that we've complied with all of our duties. The permitted uses that are allowed are within normal activities of a school. So nobody's going to fly aliens in there or anything like that without you knowing about it. those things that are non-conforming, the normal processes of notification will still exist.
So once no notifications are removed, which is what we're agreeing to for the P-zone, how will the citizens be still informed? Will they be informed differently by each property that owns that particular? Because I know you have the educational facility, and you have the exposition facility, and I'm forgetting I think it's maintenance facility, MF. I might be wrong on one of them.
Specifically for those activities, I don't know individual activities, but in all those things that we've discussed, there's a list.
Right.
Which you can
right.
review in the code.
So that would be then,
I guess one way, or there are two things that I would clarify is that one, if one thing that occurred that wasn't focused on in our previous application, if Kansas Wesleyan had come and they had rezoned the property on 9th Street to University District like the rest of their campus, their maintenance facility would have been a permitted use because it was part of their university facilities. But because they were outside the boundaries of their University District campus, they had to live by the C3 district rules. If the school district were to go out and acquire property that wasn't zoned for public use and they wished to use it to expand their facilities, there would be a public hearing to consider whether that should be rezoned to public use or not. So that would be one example. The reverse of that is, in some ways, the public use district is more restrictive both to the city and to the school district, because if the school district had property at a school site that was zoned residential that they viewed as surplus, they could sell that property, somebody could build housing on it, and nobody would be notified because the housing is a permitted use. If the school sites are all zoned to public use, then they wouldn't be able to sell the property and put housing on it because the uses would be limited to only school-related uses. So in some respects, the public use district is more limiting on the city or the county or the school district because it's limited to public use and it can't be converted from public use to another use without the neighbors being notified.
okay. So the rights are being, that was the biggest thing for me. So I just wanted to make sure, because the way the letter read and the way people read it as you took it around was that our voice would be not represented, and that was what most people feared most. And you're right, sir. I mean, I've learned a lot of civic lessons, and I've gone through a lot of the minutes to try to understand of what is going on, and I see where what's moving forward.
Now, Mr.
Yes, sir.
Hernandez, Christopher, if
Yes, sir.
I understand your argument about due process, and
Go ahead.
if that's the end of your argument, and if you have some items to tell us about maybe the property values going to be affected, some new concept, would you move on to those, or otherwise I'm going to ask you to sit down so we can hear from the rest of the public behind you.
No, that's fine. All I was going to basically just say is that if you're building buildings and you're building playgrounds, that does, just want to make sure that the residents and everybody else, that does affect us even though we don't have a say. Is that correct?
That's not correct.
That's not correct. Okay, good. How am I incorrect?
You received your
Yeah, I
the
received a letter.
notifications
Yes,
that
sir.
were appropriate under the laws, and you...
Oh, no. I wasn't saying. I'm saying that if something got built, a school building, closer to, I'm not even thinking my place, I have all the different maps. If they built a building, would that have an effect on the owners that are 200 feet away from them?
I have no idea.
Okay. And I just wasn't sure
It's
about
not my
that.
place here to answer those questions.
All right,
I
well,
will,
thank you.
the
You're
only
con-
thing I can do is give a scenario of a blank piece of property, and we have a piece of property on East Magnolia Road that's owned by USD 305. Today, it's outside the city limits, it's unplatted, and it's zoned for agricultural purposes. if they wanted to build a school there, under this scenario, they would come in to the city, they would apply for public use district, there would be a public hearing, and all the neighboring property owners have said, this 20-acre site is being proposed as a school site, and we're going to have a public hearing in front of the Planning Commission to consider whether this should be a school site. Under the current scenario, there wouldn't be a public use district to apply for. They would apply for residential zoning, and if they got it, then they would come back and there would be a second hearing on a conditional use permit that related to the specific school. And the difference is, instead of having two hearings, one on the zoning, one on the conditional use permit, there would be one hearing to consider whether that's an appropriate site for a school. And if the Planning Commission determined it was, then it would simply be left to the school district to design and build their facility, and they wouldn't have to have a second hearing because it had already been determined that that was an appropriate school site.
Okay.
So it's actually, it removes some duplication, but it never removes the due process as to whether that should be zoned for a school site.
And here's another example with the existing school. Let's look at, like Lakewood Middle School.
Yes,
It's
sir.
new, it's developing. You would think that there's not, well, let's assume that if nothing was done, it's currently zoned R3 with a CUP. If they had a proposal to, say, build a greenhouse because they were getting a grant to have an agriculture program, under the old zoning, they would have to, they couldn't just go get a building permit. They'd have to come in and ask for the conditional use permit, master plan, final site plan to be re-examined and the new plan be approved, and then they could, once that was approved, then they could apply for a building permit. If this went through, and they're zoned as public use educational facility, and they got a grant for a new greenhouse, all they would have to do is get it into the school board budget, which is subject to public scrutiny, and then come in for a building permit.
Okay.
And it's already permitted use, and all they have to do is have the site plan and the building plan meet the building code. So that's what it simplifies. It would make that much simpler.
I wish I would have
That
seen
can
that in
happen
the
on any
letter.
of these school sites if programs change over time and there's need for an expansion of the building. Once it's done, it goes to the building permit and funding process, and they don't have to go through zoning anymore.
And I do have one last question, but you're right, I have been using it most of the time, so I'll let other residents talk. Will you permit me to ask my last question after this? It's not, it has nothing
If
to
you
do
have
with due
anything more to
process.
say, please say it, Nick.
Okay. I just wanted to find out why Glennifer Hill, which was initially on there, by, just so you know, there was 14 districts. You had a parentheses. I was just a small, it was in the June 15th one. It had the parentheses. I'm sorry, I've got my papers mixed up now. It was
Hill listed last.
14, it was 14 with the parentheses, and then they had a recommendation to take Glennifer Hill out. I was just curious to why that decision was made.
Staff?
To, one, because it's not a purely educational facility, it's primarily administrative, and two, to hopefully take some of those concerns off the table.
I see. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to address this issue? Yes, ma'am. And if you would, for Crystal, your name and address for the record.
My name is Sandra Hernandez. My address is 1940 Starlight Drive. My concern is directly related to the parks that are owned by District 305 that would be affected by this public use district. In the event that, I believe it was mentioned that there could possibly be encroachment on the park property at some point. And it's my understanding, after speaking with several people and the Planning Commission and various others, that the neighborhood parks are being maintained by the city, but they are owned by District 305. And I just want to make sure that these neighborhood parks can remain parks within this public use district.
I'd have to ask staff to comment.
There are three specific examples that I'm aware of, and Mr. Kennedy may know more, but the three that I'm aware of is at the Glenifer Hill Administrative Building. There's an agreement between USD 305 and the city that allows the city to maintain playground equipment at the lower portion of the former Glenifer Hill playground. At the former Hawthorne School site, the city has a spray grounds and park north of the new apartment complex there. That property is owned by USD 305 and used by the city of Salina under an arrangement between the two entities, and also at Schilling Elementary School there is a portion of that site where the city of Salina has developed some playground facilities that are for the neighborhood in cooperation with USD 305. Wanted to clarify that those properties are owned by USD 305. They are not what would be considered parks under state law, but if you have property that is city park, and Mr. Perney may have recollection or but there was a proposal at one time to eliminate part of Centennial Park and which used to be home sites, and convert that back to home sites. And under state law, there's ability to submit petitions and force an election on whether parkland could be converted to another use. But in order for that to come into play, it has to be a designated city parkland, and at Glenifer Hill, Hawthorne, and Schilling, those are not parks. They are school district property that there's an arrangement between the city and the school district to do that. But I wanted to clarify one more time that the area north of those apartments at Hawthorne School is zoned residential today. And if the school district decided, you know what, we want to sell that property and kick the city off and let somebody build housing there, they could do that because it's zoned residential today. If this were to go through and that pocket park north of that was zoned for public use, they would not be able to do that. It would actually provide more protection for the Hawthorne site than it would if it was zoned residential, because it doesn't allow residential uses. So in many ways, although the public use district streamlines some things for the school district, it also more correctly identifies that as a public use area and not available for residential development. But there's nothing, your action today would be neutral on those three sites, because Hawthorne's not included today, and Schilling and Glenifer Hill are owned by USD 305, and they are free to decide even today what they want to do with those properties.
But that's determined by the lease that the city has with District 305. Is that not correct?
The USD 305 can decide whether they wish to lease or not lease those properties to the city of Salina. That's a decision for the Board of Education.
So right now, do the residents have anything to say about the remaining existence of the neighborhood parks? In other words, those parks are very vital in those areas, and if those parks are allowed through the public use, and I do understand that you're saying that District 305 can decide to do what they want to do, but the city has seen that these parks are viable to the residents of the city of Salina. Otherwise, over all these years, they would not have been paying for and maintaining these parks as neighborhood residential parks. So I'd like that to be a consideration whenever you, I'm not saying I disagree with the public use. I would just like there to be some protection for the residential neighborhood parks, and that's what I would like to have considered.
Now, I believe you're gaining that protection by appearing here today, and I'm sure that Mr. Kennedy back there is hearing what you say, and you may want to go to a school board meeting and also voice those concerns.
I didn't know that was allowed. I will certainly do that. Thank you.
Any other comments on that issue? I thought maybe Mr. Kennedy went on to address the park situation, but... Okay, we'll continue. Are there others that want to address this? Yes, ma'am.
I'm Joyce Matthew, and I live at 420 East Jewel, right straight across the street from Huesner School. And I just have two quick questions. Things have been a little wordy today, and I've gotten lost. But the shaded area where Huesner is, that is the only area that can have something done to it. Is that correct? In our area, the school property?
Yes, that is
Okay.
correct. And what the due process that would remain, I guess, if you want to look at it as a box or a picture that's being colored, as long as the school district colors within those lines, then what they're doing is permitted. If they color outside those lines, then neighbors are going to be notified because the boundaries would change. So, John, I don't know if you can call up the Huesner area map, but again, what we did with all of these maps is that the Planning Commission would not be able to make any recommendation today legally unless all the owners who own land within 200 feet of Huesner School were notified and were informed of what the change would be. And the change would be that anything they do inside this box would be primarily a permitted use. If they were to say, we need more parking and we got to acquire some property over here for expanded parking, then they're going to have to change the zoning on that property, and neighbors would be notified and they'd have an opportunity to object to that.
Because it will stay residential
Yes.
zoning until that
Everything
happens.
inside
Okay.
this area will stay just as it is, and all that's going to happen is the school district would have more freedom to do things
Okay.
within that box.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Other remarks? Please.
Hi, I'm Gloria Duffy, and I live at 2118 Roach. We live right across the street from Gracie Stewart. And I want to thank you for the clarifications today. And I'm kind of glad that I'm not the only one that read this letter wrong. But I really do thank you for the clarification. It makes a lot of sense. But I would kind of hope that you realize that when letters like this go out, maybe somebody from outside your circle should proof them. Because there were a lot of people that misinterpreted that as saying that, you know, we're going to rezone your house as school property, and we're going to build a playground on it, and we're not going to have to tell you about it. So we did show this letter to several people, and they all read it that way. So I did want to say that. And then also that I think sometimes we tend to be like on the negative when something like this happens because of things that have happened in the past. So, you know, we're a little bit leery sometimes when the school or the city does something that we don't have, that we feel like we don't have much say in because of things that have happened in the past. So, just wanted to thank you for the clarifications today.
Thank you, Gloria.
Thanks for your comments.
Others, please?
All others are done. I just wanted to listen, being a good listener, and again, Ken Kennedy, representing the school district now. I wanted to answer some questions, but so I don't forget, the school board meeting is a week from Tuesday at 5 o'clock. Always you're invited to school board meetings. Anytime you wish to come and be heard, you're welcome to come to school board meetings. We always have public forum at a time, and you're welcome to come up and discuss with the board your concerns or support for any issue. So know that we'll be discussing this issue at the board because I wanted to take back to them your concerns or support either and talk with them about it before I make a recommendation as their administrator as to what we might do. So I would also offer you an opportunity to call my office. Just call the Board of Education office, which is, my particular number is 309-4710. Call me if you'd like to meet with me and discuss your concerns further. I'd be happy to sit down with any of you or a group of you and try to address your questions as best we could. So that being said, I then want to say that a couple of things I wanted to follow up on. There are certainly, and Dean, you correct me when I'm wrong because I'm not a zoning expert, but there are certain things that we would be allowed to do as a district, as been stated here. Certainly one of those would be, I'll use an example of residences because you're familiar with residential zoning. I recently built a detached garage behind my house on my residence. I didn't have to come before the Planning Commission because it was permitted use. I could build that same detached garage on one of the elementary school properties right now because it's residential. I wouldn't have to come before the Planning Commission. However, if I were to build a maintenance facility on our school properties, which is much larger, as Kansas Wesleyan presented today, under the conditions of this particular zoning, I'd still need to come to the Planning Commission for conditional use. Isn't that correct, Dean?
That's correct, or a bus barn.
Or a bus barn, or any of those type of uses.
If South High's athletic field was turned into an actual stadium, those would be conditional use.
And would require the hearing before the Planning Commission. So I think that would help address some of your concerns. So imagine what we have today, those are permitted uses. Going beyond that, or putting a stadium on an elementary school yard would be a conditional, would have to come before the commission on a public hearing, okay? Then in addressing the parks, and I want to talk about the parks a little bit because, first of all, you have to understand that the parks are as important, and we call them playgrounds. After school's out, you all start calling them parks. So if you're familiar with Gracie Stewart Elementary School, we've done a lot of work on our playground, and that work is not only for the school district and for our children during the day, but it's for our community and the children and adults in the evening. With the walking trails, the baseball field, getting the water drained out of there so it wasn't a swamp land, those type of things we did to make it better for our kids as well as make it better for that part of the community that didn't have a park, truly, in that area. And now they have a park. Truly, if we had to expand Gracie Stewart, using that as an example, under this permitted use or under residential use, we could expand Gracie Stewart and put another classroom or two on it if we needed to. And that would no doubt encroach somewhat on the parks. But I want to be clear about the shared parks. Glennifer Hill might be a concern. That's where our Board of Education offices are. That particular park at Glennifer Hill is owned by the school district. It was a playground when that was a school. And when we turned it into administrative offices, we retained the ownership of that entire parcel. The district has always been sensitive to the need for parks, no question about it. We were surprised to learn we owned the water recess park up at Hawthorne. And we are in the process of working with the city to get that park converted from school district ownership to city ownership so it can be retained as a park for as long as the city chooses to do so. We're also in preliminary discussions with the city about moving some of the Glennifer Hill area to city ownership for park purposes. We don't need it as a recess playground area anymore, and we'd like for the city to have it as a park area. So we're in discussion with them. That's not been approved by either the commission or the board, but it's in preliminary discussions, and those discussions have been held publicly. So we're sensitive to the need for parks as well. We really are. And they're important to us because we have to have, green space is important to us for kids, whether it's during the weekend or during the school day. So I hope that answers your question about parks. It's never our intention to eat up any more space than we have to with construction, but sometimes we have to with schools. And then the last one is, I do want to reemphasize when I first received the drawings too from the city, I understood the circle, but I thought, oh, there's going to be some patrons concerned that we're going to encroach upon their property. Always one worry, is the school going to acquire my property? And that's not the case. I mean, if they were going to do that, that would be quite a hearing process, and that would require us to have public hearings. That is not the case. Your property is not going to be rezoned. If you live next to school, that will not change. Just the property where the school is. The property you know as a school site right now is all that's covered by this rezoning. And I hope that clarifies that. So again, The board meeting and our recommendation, we'll have it on next Tuesday, a week from tonight, and so feel free to come, but feel free to call me in advance, and I'd be happy to sit down and talk with you about it. Other than that, I'd answer any questions the commission has.
What was that phone number again?
309-4710. And my personal cell phone is 643-2225, and you can call me anytime on that one. Okay?
Ken, I have a question for you.
Yes.
Ultimately, would you like to take this back to your board before we took action on this motion?
Yes,
On this,
I would
item?
appreciate that. I hope there's consensus amongst the commissioners that this is the process you want to move forward with. Our board does have the option to pick and choose which ones they may want to have zoned this way or not. At the present time, it was important for me to hear the patrons. It'll be important for us to hear the patrons that may come to the board meeting, and then we'll make a recommendation. So we'd like to take it to board, yes, next Tuesday night, talk to them about it, and then maybe the planning commission could act on it at another meeting as far as officially approving. Is that okay with Dean?
Yes, that's it. You are the purpose of today was to vet or hear any concerns or clarifications for neighboring property owners, and the purpose of postponing action would be to have the Board of Education weigh in on how they feel, and it's equally important what their recommendation is so that the Planning Commission knows that and staff is aware of that. We have just laid out all the potential school properties, and as I said, you have the discretion to recommend one or more of those not be placed in the public use district, and you should do that based on input you've heard today and also input from the Board of Education.
So as the owner, or the representative of the owner of the property, I certainly don't own it, these people own it, but as a representative of the property, I'd ask that you table formal action on this for 2 weeks until our next planning commission. That gives me a week to meet with the board and discuss with them.
That being said, Mr. Chairman, I'd make a motion that we postpone action on case Z12-2 to the next meeting, if that gives staff time enough to...
Yes, that allows the Board of Education to get that in front of them and get a sense, report back to you what the Board of Education has decided.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any other questions or comments? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I'd like to thank Commissioner Mike Sell and Commissioner Birdsong for their articulate remarks, and also Ken, you as well. We'll move on the agenda items to application CU 11-10A, filed by Mr. Jim Pengra, requesting an amendment of the limitations on the signage applicable to a conditional use permit.
Well, what we promised you was that there would not be any consideration of signage changes or modifications of condition without an advertised public hearing, and that has occurred, and we have sent notice to all property owners within 200 feet of the pawn shop across the street and informed them that today's hearing was scheduled to consider possible changes to the proposed signage for the pawn shop across the street. And rather than getting into a lot of background, again, this is a public hearing. We sent notice out. And John, do you have the ability to project up those changed images? What we have done is taken the submittal of possible changes submitted by Mr. Pengra and basically superimpose those on the building. So to get to the crux of the matter, today the pawn shop is limited to the one sign facing north to the city-county building, and what Mr. Pengra is proposing is a total of 3 signs. That falls within the maximum allowed under the C4 district regulations. The 3 signs taken together would be approximately 100 square feet. That falls within the maximum allowable. just reminding you that the difference between a permitted use and a conditional use is that you have the discretion and authority to be more restrictive or limiting on a conditional use if you think that makes the use more compatible with its surroundings. And so you chose to do that the first go-around by limiting it to the north wall sign only. And Mr. Pengra has come back with this proposal. And so this fits within the existing sign panel of the white pawn shop sign there today. And John, you want to help me with the dimensions on the wall sign?
The wall sign is 1 foot 7 inches tall, and then 8 foot in width. So it's roughly half the dimensions of the main wall sign on the north there, slightly under that.
So we gave you a whole menu of options, but one option would be to approve both additional signs, or one sign and not the other, or approve no changes at all, which would be back to the pole sign being, existing pole sign being removed. So rather than going into great detail, I think the picture speaks for itself, and I'd be open to any questions about the proposal, and certainly Mr. Pengra's here as well.
Good evening, gentlemen. Jim Pengra. I do have color pictures of that, so it's just, I think I'll agree that the one on the pole sign does look a little bit better than maybe the existing one does.
It's just a toss-up.
We would be willing to incur the additional cost. I know what the cost is on those. I was given a proposal late Friday afternoon before, so it couldn't be included with the proposal. But the one on the west wall, that would be, I don't know, $453 to do, and the one on the pole sign would be an additional $366 to have installed. They're not quite as bright there.
Well, do you have the price of taking down the pole sign as we originally?
No, I don't. I haven't talked with the sign company. What I would probably do is, with that, I would try to work out a deal with whoever took it down to see if they would want the existing sign, you know. But no, I haven't explored the option of taking it down yet.
Well,
I was going to wait to see the outcome of this meeting.
from the last discussion, it seemed like your primary goal was to have better visibility of the business from 9th Street.
Right.
And seeing these pictures, I like the wall sign better than the pole sign still. And the wall sign is an addition, so if that was all you were asking for and you were taking down the pole sign, I'd be all for it in a minute. As far as both signs
agree with that as well. There's no one else in C4 that has a pole sign besides you.
Right, and
But your
one of the banks
grandfather.
does.
I think First Bank Kansas has a pole sign because they've got a property with
And so does
the
Sunflower,
setback.
I think. I think Sunflower Bank
Yes.
has a pole sign also.
Is their bank at the corner of 5th and Ash has a setback.
Yeah,
But mine's historic.
I believe I missed one meeting, but I was in on the original meeting where we said that we approve it without the pole sign, and we were going to take the pole sign down. You came back and you said the pole sign helps identify the business from 9th Street.
Right.
So I was a little surprised then that now we have two identifications from 9th Street. If the pole sign is for identification, then I don't see what, now we're adding another sign.
At the last meeting, it was discussed that possibly a better-looking sign on the pole. The question of...
Yeah, I understand that,
Right.
and I read the comments about...
And so it's
rather
either-
than pawn shop. So, but again, I thought we were still just talking about the pole sign. Now we've added a sign to the building. If we've added that sign and your goal is to get better visibility from 9th Street, that does it, the pole sign needs to go away like it did originally. It's my
I think
opinion.
at the last meeting, in fairness to what we're looking at there, in some point, whether it made it to the minutes or not, it was discussed, I believe by, I almost want to say Abner on there, was that we couldn't get money lenders on the smaller pole signs, so Abner wasn't opposed to, or somebody wasn't opposed to maybe putting an additional sign on the side. But
Right.
just not as big. So
Right.
I think that's where that came from. And I'm not quite sure that he's trying to pull something over on us that's there.
No, I'm
But I would
not.
agree with him in there. I would say it's, it's, if it is visibility to the to 9th Street, it'd be, I'm for voting and/or if it's, either the pole sign or the money lenders, and now that I see it that way, I believe money lenders would lend itself on the side of the building and driving more traffic from 9th Street than, I still don't know what that, I would not see, if I saw that, I would not have a clue what that is, so that's
True.
50% of the people may not even know what that
Oh,
is. So
I
money
get a lot of
lenders-
questions about that myself.
Yeah, so money lenders explains to me exactly what you do. It is facing 9th Street. It's larger than what we ever proposed from initially. I think it'd be a win-win if you were to propose just the sign on the wall and remove the pole, but that would be where I would be going towards.
And I believe in clarification, too, that I think we asked Dean at that time about the possibility under permitted uses or conditional uses, could he have two signs on the building? And the answer to that, I believe, was yes.
Yes.
That would be consistent with other
What
businesses.
he is doing falls within the standard C4 sign. He's not asking for any size or number exceptions, but what we clarified and indicated in the report, that one of the differences between a permitted and a conditional use is that the Planning Commission can always have more limitations on a conditional use than a permitted use. And
Is the sign on, the smaller sign he's proposing, is it permitted in that case or conditional?
If it would fall within the amount of square footage and the number of signs that this business could have if it were not a conditional use.
Okay. So technically, it could be almost considered permitted. The pole sign, we asked for it to be brought down before, and I'm of the opinion it does not add. In fact, I think it enhances the facility and the operation if you take it down. So I, again, am believing we made that decision earlier. We've talked about it 3 or 4 times. I like the sign. It identifies your business from 9th Street, gives good exposure, and I say that my opinion is a pole sign needs to come down.
Is there anyone from the public that wants to address this issue? Yes, ma'am.
I agree. I wouldn't know what that sign was. It might draw me that direction, but I still, it doesn't, I mean, when I'm looking for a sign, I want it to tell me what that business is.
It originated in northern Italy. It was part of the coat of arms on the Medici family crest. It somehow migrated to be the universal symbol for a pawnbroker.
Well, I think it's just as effective on the wall sign as it is on the
True.
pole, so.
If you refer to page 4 of your report, at least from what I'm hearing from board members speaking, that's kind of identified in option or alternative 3 there, that you could approve an amendment to the conditional use application to include the proposed west wall sign, but to exclude the substitute pole sign and require removal of the existing pole sign. So that's what's identified there in alternate 3.
When you're ready for a motion, I'd make that motion.
I'd second it.
It's been moved and seconded. The alternative action number 3. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We'll move on to number 5.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Pangos.
Number 5, an update on application CU 03-2B, filed by the Salina Regional Health Center.
It's in the, continuing along the lines of the subject of due process, the City Commission conducted a public hearing on May 21st on an appeal filed by the Salina Regional Health Center of the Planning Commission's April 17th decision not to approve an amendment to the original conditional use permit for hospice. And after the conclusion of that hearing, they voted 5-0 to return this item to the Planning Commission. Part of the main reason for that, it's no indication specifically of a disagreement with your findings or the information, but there was quite a bit of additional appraisal information that was presented at the City Commission meeting that was not available to you as a Planning Commission, and also some additional explanation about the specific services provided and not provided by Viridian Behavioral Health. So the legal counsel for the City Commission recommended that they do send it back, and one of the things that the City Commission also expressed interest in the Planning Commission looking at is there potentially additional conditions that could be imposed on the proposed change of use that might make it more compatible with the surrounding properties. And I summarized some of those there. After the May 21st meeting, representatives of the hospital and neighboring property owners informed me that they had agreed to enter into additional dialogue and discussions to determine whether they could come closer to finding common ground. And so I'm here to report that this item, although sent back, will not appear on your agenda for further action until those discussions are concluded. So this is not a public hearing or an action item. This is simply a report back to you that this has in fact been sent back to you. The usual practice would be to put it right back on your agenda at the closest available meeting, but it is not on your agenda for action or discussion because there's continued dialogue and discussion between the neighbors and the hospital, and when those conclude, they'll inform staff, and we will inform you, and it will appear back on your agenda.
Thank you, Dean, and I would just remark that I commend the parties for their willingness to discuss this at further length.
Yeah, so there's
Are there
no
any other
action-
matters before?
No action required.
No. Other matters?
For other matters, we'll be bringing the public use district back to you on the 19th with feedback from Mr. Kennedy about the Board of Education's feelings on that, and we have an application that has been submitted by Mr. Welsh or Todd Welsh, Inc. for rezoning of property just to the east of Presbyterian Manor for residential purposes, and the public hearing on that is scheduled for the 19th as well.
Okay. Thank you very much. Anything else before us, gentlemen? We'll adjourn. Thank you, guys.